Good morning, church. God is good all the time. God is good. Thank you so much for coming out this morning. The Bible encourages us to not forsake the gathering of the saints. The Bible tells us that where two or three of us are, there he is. And I'm sure you'll agree with me that the Lord is with us this morning. I'd like to thank the praise and worship team for leading us into that place of holiness. God bless you. I welcome you. If today's your first time worshiping with us, those who are watching on Zoom and YouTube later as well, you're most welcome. Before I met my wife, I wasn't really into movies that much. The movies that I did watch, those of us who grew up in West Africa, you know, the Mike Bamiloye movies, you know, about, Christianity and all that kind of thing. And when I did come to the UK, the films I did used to watch were, true life stories, based on sporting achievements and documentaries. And then I meet my wife, and then she opened my eyes to, films talking about, conspiracies and, juicy stuff, families fighting each other, people in relationships doing what they shouldn't be doing. It's like, wow, this is a very new avenue for me. And this morning, we're going to look together at one such juicy story, one story that at times you think to yourself, should these stories be in the Bible? Because you don't expect to find stories like this in the Bible. But one of the things I love of the Bible is no matter what genre of movie or films you like, there is something in there. Perhaps maybe not horror movies, but everything else is in here. And I want us to look at this not because of the juiciness of it and the, oh, I can't believe she did that, and oh, I can't believe he did that back, but because it's going to help us discuss and think about and learn about the topic that Pastor David has set for us for the month of July and August, which is Amazing Grace. And Auntie Stella so eloquently reminded us last week of Amazing Grace in terms of our role in ensuring that the amazing grace that the Lord has so lavishly given to us, we can make use of it. And she termed it, Occupy Till I Come. As she spoke to us from Luke chapter 19. So for this morning, Auntie Stella told us last week about Amazing Grace and how we can use that to occupy till the Lord's come. Today, I wanted to ask ourselves a question. Well, what is so amazing about Amazing Grace? What is so amazing about it? And this juicy story that I was telling you about can be found in Genesis chapter 38 from verse 1 to 30. Not 38, Christine, is it? There's only 30 verses in Genesis 38. And this is the story of a man that we know quite well, Judah, and a lady who we don't know equally so well, and her name is Tamar. And on my notes, I have put it down as we'll look at 18 events in this chapter, and we can look at how it can help us understand or try to get to a place where we get a better appreciation of what is so amazing about Amazing Grace. So if you bear with me, we're going to go through one at a time. Don't worry. I know I said 18 points, but we're going to spend no more than a minute and a half on each point. And then at the end, we'll then look at what we can learn from it and how it points us towards what really is amazing about Amazing Grace. So the first part begins with Jacob. Jacob, as we know, had 12 sons. The fourth one was Judah. His mom was Leah. And in verse 1 of Genesis chapter 38, we're told of a situation that Judah finds himself in. Now you see, from day one, Judah was always somebody who liked to compromise. If we remember, Judah was the one who convinced his brothers not to kill their brother Joseph, but to sell him to the Ishmaelites. And now we find him putting himself in a compromising position again. We're told in Genesis chapter 38 verse 1, it happened at the time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite whose name was Hira. So Hira was a Canaanite. And back then, people like Judah did not really mix. They didn't really associate with the Canaanites. But here's Judah, somebody who we know is already a compromiser. He's put himself in a compromising position, and he's going to dwell with this guy, Hira, the Archelaite. See, he's breaking from tradition. Judah is breaking from tradition. Back then, as an Israelite, mixing with Canaanites was a no-no. And as we go on, we'll find out that this had devastating results. In verse 2, we're told that Judah gets acquainted with a Canaanite woman who we're told is the daughter of Shua. Some versions call it Bath-shua. Bath means daughter of Shua in verse 2. Yes, there Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man called Shua. He married her and laid with her. In verse 3, we're told that they have a son, their firstborn son. They named him Er. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son whose name was Er. I hope you're still following me. Verse 4, they have another son who they name Onan. She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. Verse 5, they have another son. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was Akezib that she gave birth to him. So in a short space of time, Judah the compromiser has gone to a place where he shouldn't be. He's now done something that is not expected of his people. He now finds himself with 3 sons. And in verse 6, because he's now so far in to a place, he's so far embedded in a place that he shouldn't be, that now naturally he's now becoming accustomed to their way of doing things. So what does he do next? In verse 6, we're told, Judah then gets a Canaanite wife for his firstborn son, who is called Tamar. And Tamar is going to be very important in what we're talking about. Are you still with me? What is so amazing about Amazing Grace? However, in verse 7, here's the first juicy bit of this story. Let's put verse 7 up, shall we? Of verse 38. But Judah's firstborn son, was wicked in the Lord's sight. So, I know the kids are in here. So, what does the Lord do? The Lord deals with Er's time on the earth is cut short. Now, we might be thinking, well, that's a bit harsh of God, really, isn't it? Imagine if God dealt with us the way he dealt with You know, we're not really where we should be. We're not doing what we should be. So God decides, no, Anthony, your time is up. But, as we know, God always has a plan, doesn't he? He always has a plan. So now, Judah is in a place where he shouldn't be. He has children who perhaps he shouldn't have. And now he has a childless daughter-in-law, and he has no heir because she hasn't given birth just yet, and nobody to look after her. Now, back in those days, and I think even in certain traditions at the moment, if your firstborn son dies and he leaves a wife behind, if he has brothers after him, it is their duty to take on his brother's wife, marry her, look after her, and have children in his honor. This custom is called the Levirate marriage, and it comes from the Latin word which means levir, which means husband's brother. But we find, again, here's another twist. Onan said, no, I'm not having none of that. This is my brother's wife. I do not want to do this. And even if I have children with Tamar, they will not be my kids, really, because according to their tradition back then, whatever child that he fathers with his brother's wife is technically not his. He point blank refused. He said no to his father. Let's read verse 8, shall we? Verse 8. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her, and raise up an offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. Onan took advantage of something that he was meant to take seriously, but he used this to satisfy his own desires. And guess what God did? God dealt with Onan too. So now, Judah has 2 dead sons, a widowed daughter-in-law, and still no offspring. And he has his 3rd son. If you remember, they had 3 children. Shelah, who's too young to marry. So in verse 11, Judah decides, okay, he's going to send his daughter-in-law, Tamar, to her father's house so that she will wait until his last born, Shelah, is old enough to then marry Tamar. Because first big brother is gone. Second big brother refused to do his part. So now it falls down to the last born to take up the mantle. In verse 12, we find out there's another turn of events. Mrs. Judah's wife, who he married, Bathsheba, passes away. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. What does Judah do now? So we're told when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep and his friend Hira, the Abdullamite. So you see, Judah finds himself in a predicament here. And what does he do? He goes back to the place where it all started. The place where everything started to go wrong, he goes back to that place. And how many times as Christians, where because we want to do things our own way, based on our own understanding, we're so engrossed in where we are that when things go horribly wrong, we end up back at the place where it started. And at the time when he went to meet Hira again, we're told in the Bible that it was for sheep shearing. And sheep shearing happened at a time where all the shepherds were celebrating the new animals that had been born. So it was going to be packed full of people coming in. Let's go to verse 13 to 16. So we're now on point number 13. So years have now passed since Judah promised Tamar that she could marry his last born son. Tamar didn't really think that Judah was going to follow up on his promise. Verse 13, so she comes up with a plan. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself. Her plan was to disguise herself as a prostitute so that she could entice Judah to lay with her. Because she was adamant that so long had passed and still Judah was not going to fulfill the promise of her marrying her last-born son. Are you still with me? We're almost there. We're almost there. And guess what? Judah took the bait. Judah took the bait. And when Tamar was told, verse 13, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up and sat at the entrance of Enem, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come into you. For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. What will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. Because, who walks around with a goat in their pocket? Nobody does. So obviously Judah had come to see his friend. He didn't come prepared. He wasn't expecting to see what he saw. So Tamar asked him, right, whilst you go back and send me the goat, I'm going to ask something of you. And we see this towards the end of verse 18 and 19. First of all, she asked him for his seal. What will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. He said, what pledge shall I give you? She replied, your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her and went in to her. So you see 3 things that he ended up giving to her. And she knew exactly what she was doing. And these are all things that back then, a man of Judah's stature, under no circumstances, should give away. So you see, when we find ourselves in positions where we shouldn't be in, we end up giving away things that we should not give away. Number 1, his seal, his signet ring. This was his identity. A lot of the time, the signet ring was an indication of who you are, your status in society, you know, how rich you are, which family you're from. And he gave this to a woman he just met. Secondly, the cord. We're told that the cord at times is what allows the men to wear their signets around their neck. So the cord is meant to protect their identity. He gave that away too. And then finally, his staff. A man like Judah, his staff represents authority. It represents his position in society. He gave away all these 3 things. That's the equivalent of you go to Tesco and you find that you don't have any money on you. You live 15 minutes down the road, so you say to the cashier, you know what, I just live down the road. Let me go back to the house and get my wallet and come back. But you know what, I happen to have my passport in my pocket, or I have my driver's license in my pocket. You know what, you take it, you hold on to it, I'm going to come back. That's the equivalent of what Judah gave up. Now you see, he was so far gone in his sin that he didn't realize what he was giving up. When we read on from verse 20 to 23, perhaps Judah was too embarrassed to go back. We don't know. What does he do? He sends his buddy Hira with the goat to go back to Timnah to find this lady who he laid with, who we know is Tamar. But guess what? Hira couldn't find the lady. He couldn't find her. So what does he do? He comes back to Judah without his seal, without his cord, without his staff, but with a goat. Judah didn't need this. What he needed was those 3 items to be restored unto him. And at this point, Judah then thinks, you know what? Yeah, this is not going to happen now. She's gone. We're not going to do anything about it. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we will become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but he didn't find her. So as far as Judah was concerned, that was it. Nothing more to think about it. But Numbers chapter 32, verse 23 says this. But if you fail to do this, you will be sinning against the Lord. And you may be sure that your sin will always find you out. Verse 34, so now Tamar is pregnant from the encounter that she had with her father-in-law. And guess what? Judah hears about it, and he is absolutely livid. Let's find out in verse 24 what he says when he finds out. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law, Tamar, is guilty of prostitution. And as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. Wow. Judah said, bring her and let her be burned to death. Judah forgets. He's so far gone in his sin that he forgets that he's probably the bigger sinner than she is. And in true CSI fashion, I don't know if anybody watches CSI, but it's the crime show where, a murder happens and then the detectives, they then go look into the scene and then they apprehend who they think has done it, but then they apprehend them with evidence. In verse 26, guess what Tamar does? She brings the evidence. She brings the cord, she brings the seal, the cord, and the staff. And these are 3 items that only Judah knows about. Sorry, can you bring that verse 25 back up again, please? As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I'm pregnant by the man who owns these items, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Verse 26. Judah recognized them. I mean, there's no way he was going to say they're not his. Because the beauty of the signet ring, the beauty of the seal and the cord and the staff is people knew who they belonged to. So he couldn't say they're not mine. And guess what he says? She is more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son. And he did not sleep with her again. We're coming to the main points of our discussion this morning. Point number 18. Tamar gives birth to 2 boys, twins. One is named Perez. And those of us who know who Perez is of the lineage of Jesus, because he is 8 generations from King David, who we know is of the lineage of Jesus. So what, you ask? I believe this story, reading it, this story reminds us that grace is so amazing that it comes in spite of our sin. Grace comes even through our sin. That's what's so amazing about grace. You see, grace overcomes the mess that you and I make. And it provides something that you and I could never provide for ourselves. That's what grace is. Ella, could you help me on the keys, please? There's 5 points that I want us to briefly look at before we finish, to help us answer the question, what is so amazing about amazing grace? Number 1, grace takes our greatest mistakes and makes them ingredients of God's greatest blessings. Grace takes our greatest mistakes and makes them ingredients of God's greatest blessings. See, Judah didn't have a great start at all. We said at the start, Genesis 37, 26 to 27. He encourages his brothers to sell Joseph rather than kill him. Now you might think, okay, well, in him doing that, at least it saved Joseph's life, which he did. But imagine a big brother selling your brother to people you had no idea what they were going to do with him. He didn't have a great start. But we now see that because of God's grace, he becomes more sensitive and godly. You see, no matter how far gone we are in our sin, we are not bound to live in the darkness or the shadow of our sin. Judah was not bound to forever live in the darkness of his sin. God's grace, his amazing grace, lifted him up and provided for him. If God can uplift Judah and Tamar in such a way, how much more can he do it for you and for me, no matter how far we're gone? Number 2, grace surprises us with unexpected heroes. That's what is amazing about grace. To bring it closer to home, when I first met Uncle Joe didn't strike me as somebody who would be at the forefront. He struck me as a very quiet man, keeping himself to himself. Today, more often than not, he's the first face you see when you walk into the church. Grace surprises us with unexpected heroes. We didn't really think much of Tamar, the lady in this story, but she's spoken of with respect by the elders of Bethlehem. Let's look at Ruth chapter 4, from verse 11 to 12. Then the elders and all those who were at the gate said, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your home like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you have standing in Ephrathah and by the..." Never mind. But this is being said of Tamar, a lady who probably didn't seem as though she was going to amount to nothing. But grace is so special that it will make unexpected heroes. People that we do not expect. In verse 3 of Matthew chapter 1, which is right at the start of the New Testament, it says, Judah, the father of Perez, and Zerah, whose mother was Tamar. Grace made an unexpected hero of a lady who was a Canaanite, who seduced her father-in-law, who engaged in prostitution. But yet, God's grace established her. If God can do that to Tamar, are you too far gone for God not to be able to do that for you? Number 3, you see, grace is so special because it's never about you and me. It's never about you and me. Grace is always about God choosing to bless you and I in spite of what we're doing, in spite of where we are, in spite of the fact that we do not always live up to his expectation. God chooses to bless us in spite of our sin in order to demonstrate the extent of his grace, as so eloquently put in Romans chapter 9, verse 22. What if God, choosing to show his wrath and make his power known, bore with great patience the objects of his wrath prepared for destruction? He chose because of grace. What is so special about grace? Grace turns tragic failure into spiritual cornerstones and champions. Grace will turn your tragic failure into a spiritual cornerstone and a champion. You see, I believe Judah was so humbled by his failure of number 1, breaking from his family tradition, of number 2, not honoring his word to his daughter-in-law, and then number 3, of laying with his daughter-in-law. I generally believe he was so humbled by it that he committed to follow God like never before. And we know what became of Judah. Church, because of grace, it is never too late to turn your heart to God. Because of grace, it's never too late to come back to God and say, Lord, I messed up here. I need you. He still can use you and I, even though we've sinned. And there's several stories in the Bible. We look at Jonah. We look at Zacchaeus. We think of the lady who helped the prophets. I can't remember her name now. But there's so many instances in the Bible where God chooses to use people despite where they were. And that's what's special about Amazing Grace. And the last one, and possibly the most important one, I believe. Grace is amazing because it will always point us back to Jesus. It has to. If it doesn't point you back to Jesus, then it's not amazing grace. It's not. How can it be if it doesn't point you back to Jesus? We look at what God has done for us in this church. How can it not point us back to Jesus? It has to. Emmanuel's story. It all points back to Jesus. Des and Laura and baby Anaya. It has to. If it does not point back to Jesus, church, it's not amazing grace. It's not. This story had everything. It had deceit. It had dishonesty. It was twisted. But God took that twistedness, if that's a word, and he turned it into something so amazing. No matter how messed up our lives are, church, amazing grace is so special that the Lord can turn it around. But he can only turn it around if you and I bring ourselves to the place where we acknowledge that, yes, we cannot do this, and we need his amazing grace. So as we ponder on this during the week, as we think about the story of Judah and Tamar, let's remember these 5 points. That grace is so amazing because God will take our greatest mistakes and make them ingredients in his greatest blessings. That grace will surprise us with unexpected heroes, people we do not expect to make an impact in our lives because of amazing grace, they will. That grace is never about you and I. It's about a loving Father who chooses to love us regardless. That grace will take the tragedies in your life, He will take the disappointments in your life and turn you into a champion in the spiritual realm. And finally, remember that if it doesn't point you back to Jesus, then it's not amazing grace. The Lord bless you.